Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. The silver Audi glided through the night, its tinted windows concealing the passengers within. Streetlights flickered past, casting intermittent shadows across the faces of the three occupants. In the driver's seat, Agent Melissa Thompson's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. "We clear?" The gruff voice came from the back seat, where a stocky man in his 40s sat hunched, his face a mask of worry and exhaustion. "So far," Melissa replied, her tone clipped. "But we can't take any chances. You know what's at stake here, Mr. Romano." Tony Romano, once a respected accountant for the Vittorio crime family, now found himself in the unenviable position of being the mob's most wanted man. His testimony had brought down 3 capos and even implicated the underboss. The Vittorio family wanted him silenced, permanently. "I still can't believe this is happening," Tony muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "My whole life, gone in an instant." From the passenger seat, Agent Claire Dawson turned to face him. Her expression was a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Mr. Romano, I know this is difficult, but you need to understand your old life ended the moment you agreed to testify. What we're offering you now is a chance at a new one." Tony's eyes widened. "You can't be serious about this plan of yours. It's insane." Melissa's grip on the wheel tightened. "It's the only way to ensure your safety. The Vittorio family has eyes and ears everywhere. They'll be looking for a man, not a woman." The car pulled into an underground parking garage, the concrete walls amplifying the sound of the engine. As they came to a stop, Claire turned to face Tony once more. "This is your last chance to back out, Mr. Romano, but I want you to think long and hard about the consequences. If you walk away now, we can't guarantee your safety." Tony's face contorted, a war of emotions playing across his features. Fear, anger, resignation. They all battled for supremacy. Finally, he let out a long, shuddering breath. "Do I really have a choice?" Claire's expression softened. "There's always a choice, but sometimes the right choice is the hardest one to make." The trio exited the vehicle, Tony's eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit garage. Melissa led the way to an elevator, swiping a keycard to grant them access. As the doors slid shut, Tony felt as if he were sealing away his old life forever. The elevator ascended silently, opening onto a sterile hallway that could have belonged to any nondescript office building. But as they walked, Tony noticed the subtle signs of heightened security cameras discreetly placed at regular intervals, reinforced doors with biometric locks. They came to a stop outside a plain white door. Claire knocked twice, paused, then knocked once more. The door opened to reveal a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 50s. "Mr. Romano," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Ethan Reeves. Please come in." The office beyond was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the clinical hallway. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a large desk dominated the far end of the room. Dr. Reeves gestured for Tony to take a seat on a plush leather couch. "I understand you've been briefed on the basics of our proposal," Dr. Reeves began, his voice calm and reassuring. "But I want to go over everything in detail to ensure you fully understand what you're agreeing to." Tony nodded numbly, his mouth dry. "You're going to turn me into a woman." Dr. Reeves leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Romano, what we're proposing is far more than just a physical transformation. We're offering you a completely new identity, a chance to start over, free from the shadows of your past." Over the next hour, Dr. Reeves laid out the plan in painstaking detail. Hormone therapy would begin immediately, softening Tony's features and altering his body composition. Facial feminization surgery would reshape his bone structure, while other procedures would give him a more feminine silhouette. Voice training, wardrobe consultations, and intensive coaching on mannerisms and behavior would complete the transformation. "And at the end of all this," Tony said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'll be Eleanor?" Dr. Reeves nodded. Eleanor Sawyer, to be precise, engaged to be married to Agent Jason Mercer, who will act as your primary protector. Tony's head spun. It was all too much to take in. And you really think this will work? That the mob won't be able to find me? Mr. Romano, Claire interjected. We've been planning this operation for months. Every detail has been meticulously crafted. Your new identity is ironclad. Background, employment history, even social media presence. As far as the world is concerned, Eleanor Sawyer has always existed. Tony stood abruptly, pacing the length of the office. His mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what he was being asked to do. To give up not just his name, but his very identity, his gender, his past, everything that made him who he was. I need some time to think, he stammered. Dr. Reeves exchanged a glance with the agents. I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have, Mr. Romano. The longer we wait, the greater the risk of the Vittorio family locating you. Tony stopped his pacing, turning to face the others. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Then I guess I don't really have a choice, do I? Melissa stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Tony's arm. You're making the right decision. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but this is your best chance at a future at life. The next few weeks passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, hormone injections, and endless coaching sessions. Tony, now Eleanor, found herself struggling to adapt to her rapidly changing body and identity. No, Claire admonished, demonstrating the proper way to cross one's legs. You're still sitting like a man. Remember, smooth, graceful movements. Eleanor sighed in frustration, attempting the maneuver once more. I feel ridiculous, she muttered. You look fine, Melissa reassured her from across the room. It's just going to take some time to feel natural. As the hormones began to take effect, Eleanor noticed subtle changes in her appearance. Her skin softened, body hair thinned, and fat began to redistribute itself in a more feminine pattern. The first time she noticed the beginnings of body development, she spent nearly an hour staring at herself in the mirror, a mix of fascination and disbelief etched on her face. The physical changes were challenging enough, but Eleanor found the emotional and psychological aspects of her transition even more daunting. There were days when she woke up feeling like a stranger in her own skin, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had undertaken. It was during one of these low moments that she first met Jason Mercer, the agent who would be playing the role of her fiancé. Eleanor had been sitting in the safe house's living room, staring blankly at the television when the door opened. You must be Eleanor, a deep voice said. She turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a warm smile. For a moment, Eleanor forgot to breathe. Yes, that's me, she stammered, wincing at how high and unnatural her voice sounded. Jason's smile widened as he crossed the room, extending his hand. Jason Mercer, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. As their hands touched, Eleanor felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. She quickly pulled away, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. Sorry, I don't usually look like this, she mumbled, gesturing vaguely at her outfit, a simple blouse and skirt that still felt foreign on her body. Jason's expression softened. Hey, no need to apologize. I can't even imagine how difficult this must be for you, but I want you to know that I'm here to help in any way I can. Over the next few hours, Jason and Eleanor talked, slowly getting to know each other. Despite her initial nervousness, Eleanor found herself relaxing in Jason's presence. He had a way of putting her at ease, making her laugh with self-deprecating jokes and funny stories from his time in the FBI. So, tell me about our imaginary life together, Eleanor said, surprising herself with how natural the words felt. How did we meet? Where are we going to live? Jason's eyes lit up. Well, I was thinking we could say we met at a charity fundraiser. You were volunteering, I was there representing the bureau, and we just hit it off. Eleanor nodded, finding herself oddly invested in crafting this fictional romance. And our home? "I've actually been looking at houses in a quiet suburb just outside the city," Jason replied, pulling out his phone to show her some listings. "White picket fence, 2-car garage, the whole American dream package." As they pored over the photos, discussing potential renovations and decorating ideas, Eleanor felt a strange sense of hope blossoming in her chest. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she could see a future for herself, even if it wasn't the one she had originally envisioned. The weeks turned into months, and Eleanor's transformation continued. The facial feminization surgery was a grueling ordeal, leaving her swollen and bruised for weeks. But as the bandages came off and the swelling subsided, she found herself staring at a face she barely recognized. Softer, more delicate, undeniably feminine. "You look beautiful," Claire said, standing behind Eleanor as she examined her reflection. Eleanor touched her cheek gently, still tender from the surgery. "I look different." "Different can be good," Claire replied with a smile. "How do you feel?" It was a loaded question, one that Eleanor had been struggling with for months. How did she feel? Scared, certainly. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "I feel like I'm starting to become Eleanor," she said finally. "Not just playing a role, but actually becoming her." Claire squeezed her shoulder gently. "That's a good thing. The more natural this feels, the safer you'll be." As Eleanor's physical transformation neared completion, her training intensified. Hours were spent perfecting her new voice, practicing makeup application, and learning the myriad of small details that would sell her new identity. Through it all, Jason was a constant presence, offering support and encouragement. Their fake engagement began to feel increasingly real, with shared inside jokes and genuine affection developing between them. One evening, as they sat on the safe house's small balcony watching the sunset, Jason turned to Eleanor with a serious expression. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low. Eleanor's heart raced. Had something gone wrong? Had the mob discovered their plan? "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Jason took a deep breath. "I know this started as an assignment, but I think I'm falling for you. The real you, Eleanor." Eleanor froze, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. Part of her wanted to remind Jason that she wasn't real, that Eleanor was just a construct created to keep Tony Romano alive. But another part, a part that had been growing stronger with each passing day, recognized the truth in his words. "Jason, she began, struggling to find the right words. "I don't even know who I am anymore. How can you be falling for someone who doesn't exist?" He reached out, taking her hand in his. "You do exist. Eleanor Sawyer is just as real as Tony Romano ever was. You're brave and kind and stronger than you give yourself credit for. That's who I'm falling for." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes. For so long, she had felt like she was living someone else's life. But in that moment, with Jason's hand in hers and the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues, she realized that this was her life now. And maybe, just maybe, it could be a good one. "I think," she said softly, "I might be falling for you, too." As the day of their wedding approached, the tension in the safe house ratcheted up. Final preparations were made, contingency plans reviewed, and last-minute adjustments to Eleanor's appearance were completed. The night before the ceremony, Eleanor lay awake in bed, her mind racing. Tomorrow she would step out into the world as Eleanor Sawyer for the first time. The thought filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Eleanor, are you awake?" It was Melissa's voice. "Come in," Eleanor called, sitting up in bed. Melissa entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "I thought you might have trouble sleeping," she said, handing one of the mugs to Eleanor. "Chamomile tea, my grandmother's cure for pre-wedding jitters." Eleanor smiled gratefully, inhaling the soothing aroma. Thanks. I guess I am a little nervous. Melissa perched on the edge of the bed. That's perfectly normal. Even without the, unique circumstances of your situation, getting married is a big deal. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, sipping their tea. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Melissa, can I ask you something? Of course. Eleanor hesitated, gathering her thoughts. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Not just marrying Jason, but all of this? She gestured vaguely at herself. Melissa set her mug down, turning to face Eleanor fully. I think you're doing the brave thing, the necessary thing. And from what I've seen over these past months, I think you're doing what makes you happy. Eleanor blinked, surprised. Happy? I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. Maybe you should, Melissa said gently. Because from where I'm sitting, Eleanor Sawyer seems a lot more at peace with herself than Tony Romano ever was. As Melissa's words sank in, Eleanor felt a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying lift from her shoulders. She was right. Somewhere along the way, this new identity had ceased to be just a disguise. It had become a part of her, as real and vital as any other aspect of her being. The next morning dawned bright and clear. As Eleanor stood before the mirror in her wedding gown, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Gone was any trace of Tony Romano. In his place stood a beautiful, confident bride. You ready? Claire asked, adjusting Eleanor's veil one last time. Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of her dress. As I'll ever be. The ceremony itself was small, attended only by a handful of trusted agents posing as friends and family. But as Eleanor walked down the aisle towards Jason, she found that the audience didn't matter. All she could see was the man waiting for her, his eyes shining with love and admiration. As they exchanged vows, Eleanor felt a sense of peace wash over her. This might not have been the life she had chosen, but it was the life she had been given. And as Jason slipped the ring onto her finger, she knew with absolute certainty that she would make the most of it. The reception was in full swing when Melissa approached the newlyweds, her expression serious. I hate to interrupt, she said quietly, but we've just received word. The Vittorio family has called off the hit. They believe Tony Romano is dead. Eleanor felt Jason's arm tighten around her waist. Are you sure? He asked. Melissa nodded. Our sources are reliable. It seems your disappearance act was convincing enough. As the implications of this news sank in, Eleanor felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. The immediate threat to her life was gone, but also a strange sense of loss. With Tony Romano truly dead, there was no going back. Eleanor Sawyer was her reality now. Jason turned to her, concern etched on his face. Are you okay? Eleanor looked up at him, then out at the small gathering of people who had become her new family over the past months. She thought about the future stretching out before her, a future she never could have imagined, but one that now felt right. You know what? She said, a genuine smile spreading across her face. I think I am. The silver moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the quiet suburban street. Eleanor Sawyer Mercer stood at the kitchen window, her fingers absently tracing the delicate gold band on her left hand. 2 years had passed since that fateful day when she'd said goodbye to Tony Romano and embraced her new identity. 2 years of building a life with Jason, of learning to navigate the world as Eleanor. A pair of strong arms encircled her waist, and she leaned back into her husband's embrace. Penny for your thoughts, Jason murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Eleanor smiled, turning in his arms to face him. Just thinking about how far we've come, how different everything is now. Jason's eyes softened as he tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Any regrets? She considered the question, her mind drifting back to the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her in those early days. The discomfort of her changing body, the struggle to adapt to a whole new way of being. But then she thought of the peace she'd found, the love she shared with Jason, the life they'd built together. "Not a single one," she replied, stretching up to plant a soft kiss on his lips. Their moment of quiet intimacy was interrupted by the shrill ring of Jason's cell phone. His brow furrowed as he glanced at the caller ID. "It's Melissa," he said, a note of concern in his voice. Calls from their FBI handler were rare these days and almost never brought good news. Eleanor's heart quickened as Jason answered the call, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. When he finally hung up, his face was grim. "What is it?" she asked, bracing herself for the worst. Jason ran a hand through his hair, a habit he'd picked up when stressed. "There's been a development. The Vittorio family. They're asking questions again. Someone stirred up old doubts about Tony Romano's disappearance." Eleanor felt blood drain from her face. "But how? We were so careful." "I don't know," Jason admitted. "Melissa didn't have all the details yet, but she wants us to come in tomorrow for a full briefing." That night, sleep eluded Eleanor. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with possibilities. Had someone recognized her? Had she slipped up somewhere, left some trace of Tony behind? The life she'd built over the past 2 years suddenly felt fragile, like a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, Eleanor made a decision. She wouldn't let fear dictate her life again. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on, with Jason by her side. The FBI field office was a hive of activity when they arrived the next morning. Melissa ushered them into a conference room where Dr. Reeves and Claire were already waiting. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Melissa began, her usual calm demeanor tinged with worry. "We've received intelligence that Marco Vittorio, the family's new underboss, has been asking around about Tony Romano's last known whereabouts." Eleanor felt Jason's hand tighten around hers. "But why now?" she asked. "It's been years." Dr. Reeves leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "It seems Marco has always been skeptical of the reports of Tony's death. With his recent promotion, he finally has the resources to pursue his suspicions." "So what do we do?" Jason's voice was steady, but Eleanor could sense the underlying tension. Claire pulled out a thick folder, spreading its contents across the table. "We have a few options. We could move you again, create new identities." "No." Eleanor's firm response surprised even herself. All eyes in the room turned to her. "Eleanor," Melissa began gently, "I know you've built a life here, but your safety has to come first." Eleanor shook her head, a newfound determination welling up inside her. "I'm tired of running, of living in fear. This is my life now, and I won't let them take it from me." A heavy silence fell over the room. It was Jason who finally broke it. "She's right," he said, squeezing Eleanor's hand. "We can't keep starting over every time there's a threat. There has to be another way." Dr. Reeves nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. Perhaps it's time we changed our approach. Instead of hiding, we bring the fight to them." Over the next several hours, a plan began to take shape. It was risky, audacious even, but it offered the possibility of ending the threat once and for all. The core of the plan hinged on Eleanor doing the one thing she'd thought she'd never do again, face the Vittorio family as Tony Romano. "It's insane," Claire argued. "We've spent years establishing Eleanor's identity to suddenly revert." "Not revert," Dr. Reeves interjected. "Evolve. Eleanor is as much a part of who you are now as Tony ever was. We use that." The idea was to set up a meeting with Marco Vittorio, ostensibly to turn himself in and cut a new deal. But in reality, it would be a carefully orchestrated sting operation designed to gather enough evidence to bring down the entire Vittorio operation. As the details were hashed out, Eleanor felt a strange mix of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. This was her chance to confront her past, to finally close the chapter on Tony Romano and fully embrace her life as Eleanor. The weeks leading up to the operation were a whirlwind of preparation. Eleanor worked with vocal coaches to recapture Tony's deeper timbre, while still maintaining subtle hints of her new identity. Makeup artists and costume designers collaborated to create a look that merged Eleanor's features with Tony's, a visual representation of her journey. On the night before the meeting, Eleanor stood before the mirror in their bedroom, studying her reflection. The face that looked back at her was a perfect blend of her past and present selves. Tony's strong jawline softened by Eleanor's delicate features, a seamless fusion of identities. Jason appeared behind her, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "How do you feel?" Eleanor took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Like I'm finally ready to face my demons." The rendezvous point was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Eleanor arrived alone, her heart pounding beneath the carefully tailored suit that concealed a wire and other surveillance equipment. Marco Vittorio was waiting, flanked by 2 burly bodyguards. His eyes widened as Eleanor stepped into the light, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Tony?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable. "Is it really you?" Eleanor allowed a wry smile to play across her lips, her voice a careful modulation between Tony's gruff tone and her own softer cadence. "In the flesh, more or less." Marco's shock quickly gave way to anger. "You have some nerve showing your face here after what you did. Do you have any idea what your betrayal cost us?" "I have a pretty good idea," Eleanor replied coolly. "But I'm here to make things right, to cut a new deal." As they talked, Eleanor carefully steered the conversation, drawing out admissions and details that would be crucial for the FBI's case. All the while, she could feel the weight of the past 2 years, the fear, the uncertainty, the struggle to find herself, lifting from her shoulders. Just as Marco was about to reveal the location of a major drug shipment, the warehouse doors burst open. FBI agents swarmed in, led by Jason and Melissa. "FBI! Everybody freeze!" In the chaos that followed, Eleanor locked eyes with Jason across the room. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of completion. She was neither Tony nor Eleanor, but something entirely new, a synthesis of all her experiences, all the lives she had lived. As the dust settled and Marco Vittorio was led away in handcuffs, Melissa approached Eleanor, a look of admiration on her face. "You did it," she said softly. "It's over." Eleanor nodded, a wave of emotion washing over her. "It is, for all of us." In the days that followed, as the full scope of the operation's success became clear, Eleanor found herself at a crossroads. With the threat from the Vittorio family neutralized, she had the freedom to choose her path forward. One evening, as she and Jason sat on their back porch watching the sunset, she turned to him with a question that had been weighing on her mind. "If I wanted to stay Eleanor, would that be okay with you?" Jason's face broke into a warm smile. "Eleanor, Tony, or anyone in between. I love you for who you are, not what name you go by or how you look." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes as she leaned into his embrace. I think Eleanor is who I'm meant to be, who I want to be." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Eleanor Sawyer Mercer felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. In the end, she realized, it wasn't about choosing between Tony and Eleanor. It was about embracing all the parts of herself, past and present, masculine and feminine, strength and vulnerability. She was a tapestry woven from all her experiences, unique and beautiful in its complexity. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Eleanor turned to Jason with a smile. "So what's our next adventure?" He laughed, pulling her close. "With you, I'm ready for anything." And as they sat there, 2 people who had found love in the most unexpected of circumstances, Eleanor knew that whatever the future held, she would face it as her true self. Complex, evolving, and finally, completely free. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.